Good morning, friends. I'm Faith Perry, our communication pastor here at Shalimar Methodist. This week with Hurricane Sally, we've had a little bit different working schedule and I've been working from home. And so because of that, I am filming Sunday school from home. So it is not our normal filming setup, but I hope that you can still hear me okay as we do this Sunday's scripture lesson. In Sunday school and in the service, we are doing our week 2 of the comeback series. And this week, our comeback story is Joseph. And as I was preparing this lesson this week, my daughter decided she wanted to share a little bit about what she knew of Joseph. So here is...
Once there was a boy named Joseph. Joseph had 10 older brothers. He was the favorite of them all. One day, Joseph's father gave Joseph a coat of many colors. Joseph's brothers became jealous of his coat of many colors, and they made fun of him. One day, Joseph had a dream. In his dream, he and his brothers were gathering bundles of grain. And all of a sudden, Joseph's bundles stood straight in the air, and his brothers' bundles bowed down to the ground. The next day, Joseph told his brothers about this dream. When he told his brothers about the dream, they became even more jealous about his coat of many colors.
What did they do when he came to see them?
What was it?
They threw it in. They threw him where? Where did they throw him?
That's after the next dream.
When he came, they pretended that it's okay. When they pretended that he was what? It's okay. What did they do? They sold him where?
That's after the next dream.
It's okay to skip the next dream.
One day, Joseph's father asked him to go check on his brothers and report back to him. When he was still ways away from his brothers, his brothers saw him. And they decided right then and there to sell Joseph to some travelers. So they sold him. And he got taken to Egypt, where he got sold to Pharaoh.
We're so grateful for our children learning these foundational stories in our Christian faith. For many of us, we learned these stories when we were kids, but for many of you as well, you may be new to the Christian faith and these stories may be brand new. And if so, I actually envy the fact that this is a fresh look at this story. So if there's anything that you have questions about, please be sure to drop them into the comment feed if you're on Facebook, and if you're watching on the church website right now, drop them in the website chat so we can talk about any questions that you might have. And we'll have an opportunity tomorrow night at 7:30 for you to join me for Ask the Pastor to talk about other things that might come up from Joseph's story. So I'd like to take a moment to start at the beginning of his comeback story, which starts in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 3. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. "Listen to this dream," he said. "We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered round and bowed low before mine. When Joseph's brothers heard him coming, we're jumping ahead a little bit in the story. When Joseph's brothers heard him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into these cisterns, and we can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." When Joseph arrived, they ripped off his beautiful robe he was wearing, and they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, and there was no water in it. Eventually, Joseph isn't actually killed by his brothers, but one of his brothers convinces them to spare his life, and he is sold to some travelers instead of killed. But they tell his father that he's been killed, and he's been killed by a wild animal. Joseph is young. He's 11th in the order of brothers, and he is a dreamer. He has a positive outlook on life, and God's given him this gift of kind of knowing messages from God through his dreams. But he doesn't really know what to do with it. As he receives this first dream of some future that he doesn't quite understand, his excitement as he shares it with his family isn't received well. His brothers don't take kindly anyway to the 11th brother that is loved so much by their father. And now he's got this dream that he's going to be over the rest of them. We need to remember, though, that both Joseph and his brothers had some blame here in this situation. Joseph shouldn't have held his dream over others. He was foolish to have boasted about it. But his brothers also gave in to temptation when they allowed that jealousy to overcome them to the point of wanting to kill their brother. But God uses everything for good. And Joseph's story doesn't end here, just as one of his brothers spared his life. If we jump ahead to Genesis 39, when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food he was going to eat. Joseph was a handsome man and well built, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. "Come and sleep with me," she demanded. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." She kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way. One day, however, when no one else was around, he went to do his work, and she came and grabbed his cloak, demanding for him to come and sleep with her. Joseph tore away, but left his cloak in her hand. She kept the cloak with her until her husband came home, and she told Joseph the story. "That Hebrew slave you brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me," she said. "But when I screamed, he ran out, leaving me his cloak." Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her, and he took Joseph and threw him into prison, where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him his faithful love, and the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison ward. So Joseph, betrayed by his brothers because he was favored by his father, was sold by traders to Potiphar. Potiphar recognized that Joseph was a leader. He was good with things like keeping up with the household and managing all the things in Potiphar's house. And God blessed everything that Joseph managed. So Potiphar's house thrived under Joseph. And so Joseph was put in charge of the entire household. Potiphar didn't worry with Joseph in charge. We see the leadership of Joseph here. But yet, envy struck in again. Potiphar's wife saw Joseph as a man who had power and a man who was physically attractive. But yet Joseph relied on who he was in God. He claimed when he stood up against temptation that not only was it not right to his master, Potiphar, but it was also not right before God. When Joseph was thrown in jail, we see that God was with him and he found favor with the prison warden, just the same. See, Joseph, in every situation you'll see throughout his story, he stands firm on what he believes, and he also stays true to who he is as a Hebrew and a follower of God. But his characteristics, his nature, and who he is showing even here as a young man. Let's go forward to Genesis 40. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with them and put them in the prison where Joseph was. They remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. When they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed they looked upset. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead, tell me your dream." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream first. "In my dream, I saw a grapevine in front of me. The vine had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon it produced clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took a cluster of grapes and squeezed the juice into the cup, and I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph interpreted this dream for the cupbearer and let him know that the dream meant that in 3 days he would be back into Pharaoh's service. Picking back up into the passage, Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials. He summoned his chief cupbearer and the chief baker to join the officials. Then he restored the chief cupbearer to his former position so he could once again hand Pharaoh his cup. Just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. However, the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. See, when Joseph interpreted the dream, one of the things he said is, "When this dream comes true, remember me, for I am here in prison for something that I did not do." But the cupbearer forgot. He forgot about Joseph, and he forgot that Joseph freed him through his dream's interpretation. We don't know how it would have been if Joseph hadn't gotten that interpretation. Maybe the cupbearer would have acted irrationally. Maybe he would have acted out of fear and said something to make Pharaoh angry. Maybe that interpretation of the dream made all the difference for him. Maybe it didn't make any difference in the world. I don't know. But whatever it was, the cupbearer forgot that Joseph gave him peace and comfort while he was in prison and just left Joseph there. Joseph's identity as a dreamer is continuing. Not a dreamer with his head in the clouds, but we see early on that he was a dreamer that received information from God through dreams. But he still claims it to God. Only God can interpret dreams. He had a good life serving Potiphar, and now he's in prison, even though he didn't deserve it. He's serving the prison warden, and as he meets these servants of Pharaoh and helps them, he's continuing to serve a time he did not deserve. We finish this story with Joseph's predictions coming true. And we know that he deserves to be free, but yet he's not. We pick back up in Genesis 41. It's 2 years later, and Pharaoh dreams that he's standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows come up behind them in the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the fat cows. And Pharaoh had a second dream about heads of grain, plump and beautiful, and 7 more heads of grain, shriveled and withered. The thin heads swallowed up the fat heads, and Pharaoh woke. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dream, so he called for all the magicians and wise men, but no one could tell him what his dreams meant. Finally, the king's cupbearer spoke up. "Today I have been reminded of my failure," he told Pharaoh. "Some time ago you were angry with me and the guard, and one night when I was in prison I had a dream, and there was a young Hebrew man with us who was a slave. He told us what our dreams meant, and he was correct. After 2 years of sitting in prison, after 2 years of being there for the wrong reason, after 2 years of interpreting the cupbearer's dream, Joseph was finally remembered. We're not told what Joseph did during those 2 years. We're not told how he felt or how he reacted when the cupbearer went back to Pharaoh's court and never returned to say thank you, or never returned to try to fetch Joseph from prison. But now 2 years later, when Pharaoh needs a dream interpreter, he remembers Joseph. And now Joseph has the opportunity to interpret a dream, but this time for Pharaoh. Joseph responded that Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing, that God is telling Pharaoh in advance that there is a famine coming, that Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put them in charge of the entire land of Egypt. And Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Joseph's suggestion was well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, "Can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a ranking higher than yours." So think for a moment. Moses went from being the favorite of his brothers, being loved by his father dearly, to being hated so much by his brothers that they faked his death and sold him into slavery. Then he got a good job at Potiphar's house, and he oversaw Potiphar's house well, and he was serving his master well, but yet his master's wife, jealous that she couldn't have him because of his righteousness, brought false claims against him, and he was thrown into prison. After years of being in prison, he is given the opportunity to serve Pharaoh, and he's now given dominion over all of Pharaoh's lands, second only to Pharaoh. The famine is coming, and he is able to honor God in a land that is not a God-fearing land. Now pick up in chapter 42. When Jacob, Joseph's father, when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, this is during the famine, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I've heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy enough grain to keep us alive." So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. But Jacob wouldn't let the younger brother Benjamin go for fear that some harm might come to him. Since Joseph was governor of all of Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. And Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger. "Where are you from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan. We have come to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him, and he remembered the dreams he had had about them many years ago. So Joseph then insists that they are there for evil reasons, and they insist that they're not. He wants to see the rest of his family, and this is all part of his plan to see his family restored and to see his younger brother Benjamin and his father. The next couple chapters, Joseph goes on to actually have the rest of his family brought to Egypt. He reveals who he is to his brothers, and he restores the relationship of his family. Pharaoh welcomes all of Jacob's family back to Egypt. And it's a beautiful healing of who they are. When they're at the banquet table and Joseph reveals in 45 who he is, he says, I am Joseph. I am the brother that all those years ago you sold. Is my father okay? Don't be upset. Don't be angry. Because when you sold me, it was God who sent me here to save our family. And said, I'm not upset with you. Hurry back and tell Father that I'm okay. And you know, his brothers were just shocked at this news that the person that they thought was dead, they thought that this servant of Pharaoh was trying to punish them for what they did to Joseph all those years ago, not even realizing that Joseph was here trying to help test their pure heart, the protection of their father and of Benjamin. And in the end, he was trying to reunite them. Joseph was trying to be patient when all that happened. His story was a long one, but eventually when his family came back, he got to see his father again. His father died after he came to Egypt, and Joseph and Jacob were reunited. Joseph's comeback story is not a short one, and I just have given you the highlights of it. I encourage you, if you haven't read this story before, or if you haven't read it recently, to go back to Genesis and read it again. There's so much wonderful pieces of God's hand working. Joseph was dedicated to who God was. He was dedicated to giving God glory and to trying to honor God no matter the situation, no matter where he was, no matter how favorable or unfavorable. Because of that, God honored him and continued to find a way to give him a place to serve. It's truly a comeback. And Pastor Philip, in his message today, is talking about how Joseph had multiple comebacks. If you haven't watched that service yet, I encourage you to watch. It'll be playing again at 11:15. Pastor Matt's talking about how Joseph continued on no matter what. If you have questions, though, about Joseph's story, how you can apply some of these things to your life, I'd love to unpack them with you. Drop your comments on our Facebook page. Tomorrow night, 7:30, on our closed Facebook group, we'll have Ask the Pastor. If you haven't joined our group yet, then I encourage you to do so and chat with me about how the Joseph story relates to you right now, or what thoughts it brings up in your mind, or how you can connect with others when it comes to these comeback stories of Scripture. If you haven't watched service, they'll be played here on our Facebook page and on our website. The Freedom Service plays at 11:07 and Traditions at 11:15. But if you have questions, just let us know, because it's our goal to be as connected with our congregation as possible during all these times. If you need to contact me, you can send me a Facebook message, you can shoot me an email, drop me a phone call. We're here to help. But it's our prayer that we can be like Joseph in times of hardship, that we can stay the course even when it is a long path. Because Joseph's path was definitely a long comeback story, but one that was very rewarding. God bless, friends. I am Faith Perry. I'm the communication pastor. And until next week's Sunday school, I hope you have a great week.